Next up, we have Jessica Lovegrove-Walsh, who is the founder and executive officer of Friends of Parks Queensland, a not-for-profit organisation dedicated to supporting volunteers and conservation efforts within Queensland's national parks. Jessica is also a biosecurity ambassador for Queensland.
Geez, tough act to follow. Thanks, Michael. Set the bar a bit higher today. Hi, my name's Jessica. Thank you so much for having me here today. So a little bit confusing. I am wearing two hats today. Michael's wearing none, so I'm compensating for his loss of a specific identity here. So I tried to throw on the biosecurity ambassador hat, but he didn't want it. Friends of Parks Queensland is more of my primary role, but like many conservationists in our little not-for-profit industry, we're all battling to get full-time work. So I split myself across many different organisations, but primarily Friends of Parks Queensland is my main gig. But before I dive in any deeper, I would also like to join the masses of acknowledgement of country here. So I'll pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging of the lands on which we're meeting today. And I'd like to extend those respects also to the Kumameri clan of the Yugambeh language speaking nation, who will be featured in this presentation. And I've got this lovely photo of Max Dillon, who's a local Kumameri fella that I had the pleasure of being involved in a production as well with Max about the place of creation, which is Burleigh Head National Park or Gelurgal. Now, my talk today is on communities in action, but this has already been touched from many different directions, so I'm going to have a bit more of an informal yarn because of the sake of it being the afternoon and avoiding redundancy so people don't fall asleep. So let's freestyle and see how it goes. Now, the resounding theme that we've had here today is there is a lack of funding available for conservation. Now, this is just about the species that we know about. We also touched upon the undescribed species. So we've got species of insects like the koala scat moth, who should probably be listed as well as endangered because they rely on koala scat. Koalas are endangered, blah, blah, blah. They're still not listed. We've got fungi. We've got so many undescribed species here in our magnificent state of Queensland. But of what we do know, the funding situation is incredibly dire. So it makes sense that we try and squeeze every single dollar of funding that any of us in this room can get, which you would all be very, very aware of. Also, trying to find those philanthropists that are just so difficult to find in this country. You look at America and you think, how, why? Why can't we get that here? Ed Sheeran, look our way, please, come on. But anyway, there's a 93% shortfall, and that's from 2018-19. And with the increase of threatened species added to the list every single year, that is probably only going to grow, which is the sad truth in which we live. But there is a silver lining. So the recent Volunteering in Queensland report that came out in 2024 found that for every dollar invested in volunteering in Queensland, there is a $4.70 return. So there is a big push here, I've already seen it, to mobilise communities when you're doing your conservation research or biocultural value conservation as well, and trying to leverage that in-kind support that exists within these communities who are very, very connected to their local patch. They are their own local knowledge holders, and if what they don't know, they can be trained through training sessions like the threatened flora identification surveys as well, which we all had the pleasure of going to a workshop on this afternoon, which was brilliant. So enter Friends of Parks Queensland. So we are a not-for-profit organisation. We are funded by the Department of Environment, Science and Innovation to support conservation volunteers that work on parks. So that is in Queensland, it's our national parks, conservation parks and state forests. So we are now in our second year of operation, which has been absolutely fantastic, but we still have a long way to go in terms of meeting our vision, which is that every protected area, every single natural space is connected to an educated and empowered community to help look out for it. We want those local knowledge holders, whether they be Indigenous or whether they be locals who are hyper-fixated on their backyard and want to know everything about it. Especially true during COVID when we didn't have a choice of going anywhere else, which led to quite a sharp rise in the Friends of Parks groups, which has slowly started to decline. So the sad truth of the space that we're in now in terms of volunteers is there has been a 43% reduction in pre-COVID volunteering to now, which is quite devastating when you think of all of the works that volunteers do across sporting organisations, school groups, and of course conservation. So it's a difficult time to be in this space, but there is still a lot of willingness to get involved in conservation, especially as a way of individuals to do something proactive about the biodiversity crisis, which is really weighing on a lot of people's minds, and especially the younger generations. So our organisation was born during that COVID boom in Friends of Parks groups. I'm from Toowoomba country on the Gold Coast, and I started a group in 2020 when I'd just returned from studying overseas. It was a very serendipitous time because I arrived back in Australia about a month before borders closed, which is very lucky. I didn't know why I needed to go home. I just felt this internal inkling that I needed to go back to Australia, especially watching the 2019-20 bushfires unfold from abroad. I really felt like there was something for me to do back here, but I just didn't know what it was then. So in my blissful state of unemployment, when I arrived back home, I started my local Friends of Parks group, which was in Nerang National Park, and that was just one of then an additional 4 groups that formed within a 12-month period. Now before that, there was just one group, and they were supported by the 6 rangers within the Gold Coast Management Unit. Now they had to support 5 groups, and quite frankly, they just weren't resourced to do that job. They were struggling to get around to their 32 patches of protected areas that exist within the Gold Coast, let alone support the volunteer groups. So there became a need to have an umbrella organisation that actually helps support these volunteers. And we don't just want to support them, we want to make sure that their works are professionalised. So our organisation works within the land management frameworks that are available through QPWS, so that's the values-based management framework, and there's a few rangers here today who are quite familiar with it and members of the department. That's really about protecting and prioritising key values, whether they be ecological values or even down to visitor services. Our volunteers are primarily conservation focused, and normally all of these groups start out with a passionate local volunteer coordinator who's a volunteer themselves, who just has a really, really big affinity for one specific weed in one specific patch, just wants to see it gone. Mine was lantana on a hillside, and one that I'll talk about soon as well. You can see the transformation that they've made. But it doesn't stop at land management. It also goes into citizen science, which Michael has touched upon brilliantly. Of course, community engagement and education and awareness are at the core of these as well. We've built quite a good partnership on the Gold Coast with the local mob down there, but we're always willing to form relationships with First Nations people and traditional owners across all the countries that our volunteers work on. We are primarily supporting the Southeast Queensland region at the moment, and I know, I'm sorry to everybody outside of Southeast Queensland who's in Queensland here, I know that you're neglected. It's just a lot easier for volunteers because you've got that population centre there, but we would like to expand out into further areas as we continue to grow as well. But my big push here today, because we have so many brilliant minds all together in one room, is trying to encourage you, if you're in this space as a researcher, to think about leveraging off the volunteers that work in our national parks. So we already know from Jen that 80% of Queensland's threatened species exist within national parks. The biggest threat to these plant species are weeds, and that is exactly what these volunteers are out there doing. So they are champions of plant conservation, even though our fauna might have to get marketed at the top of it because, like has already been said, fauna is a lot more charismatic than our beautiful plants in a lot of instances, so we try and lean on that. So our team is small. We only have 3 part-time employees, which also restricts our geographical spread, but we would like to expand more into other areas as we continue to grow. One quick little case study of a group that was born on the Gold Coast during that post-COVID boom was Friends of Tallabudgera Creek Conservation Park. So for those who are not familiar with the Gold Coast area, Tallabudgera Creek is situated right on Burleigh Heads and between Palm Beach and Burleigh. So you can see by my dodgy red box there, Tallabudgera Creek Conservation Park itself flanks both the northern and southern bank of the creek, but the volunteers in this group, they just work the southern side. Now, this group, in just 3 years of operation, has recruited 600 volunteers, which is absolutely amazing. They have utilised a model of combining volunteer works with grant funding for contractors. And through this model, they have already restored 80% of the 16 hectares. Now, we know that restoration isn't linear, it's cyclical, but because they're volunteers, they're going to be following up on this contractor work, and you can almost guarantee that this area will be secure from massive weed invasions in the future. Now, just to highlight what it looked like before, you can probably see that that's not really what the ecosystem should look like. Ground asparagus was the group leader Gary Scott's sort of personal vendetta, and it honestly was covering over 80% of the understory of this park. This park has not received a burn in at least 30 years. It's located near a very, very, very urban population, a lot of mansions, a lot of people unfortunately still dumping mattresses to this day in the park. So it's got a lot of urban pressures, which also means it had a beautiful array of garden escapees, ivy, and of course things like Madeira vine and other ecosystem altering plants, which are just no good to have around in our natural areas. But when we fast forward to 2024, the group has discovered an endangered Cryptocarya fetida, which is absolutely amazing, and the ecosystem has been completely changed and restored back to really how it should be. So when you see endangered species, little seedlings like this popping up, you know that you're doing the right thing. And that is why I'm also incredibly thankful to have that training in threatened flora identification, because now this group is ready to undertake targeted flora surveys. It's a small park, 16 hectares, it's a sliver. The trained volunteers now are very, very aware of what this plant looks like. They're so proud of it being recorded for the first time by them in this park, and they're going to start undertaking counts, so then they can measure how this population in this area is growing over time. And that is just one of the things that these volunteer groups can do, and this model can be applied across all protected areas if we can just mobilise and train the community and provide a bit of extra direction. And with the other hat on, the other element that I never talk about, but some people have talked about here today, is that these Friends of Parks groups, they're not just champions of the community, and they're not just champions of the environment, they're also champions of biosecurity. Now, biosecurity is still often spoken about in terms of agriculture or in the plant space, myrtle rust and other diseases, which is incredibly important. But we can't forget these ecosystem altering weeds that are a biosecurity threat on our biodiversity, and celebrating the Friends of Parks groups with multiple different hats is something that I've really taken upon this role to do. I've also had the privilege of meeting with the Deputy Director General a couple of times now and feeding back that information and those concerns from our volunteers directly to the top of DAF, which has been brilliant. So if you have any concerns related to biosecurity that you would like to talk to me about, particularly related to conservation, then I'm very open to having some discussions about that as well. We have a long way to go in terms of reforms, particularly related to Bribie and the Sunny Coast in terms of the wildlings from the exotic pine plantations that are also reducing our biodiversity. And a few other things have come up as well. So yeah, if you want to talk to me more about that role, I'm around for dinner, and then unfortunately I have to go and wear another hat from a different organisation for the rest of the week. So I would like to finish by just quickly thanking a few key people who are here today who have helped our organisation. The first is Paul Donachew, who is almost a founding member of our organisation. Paul Donachew, somebody's got to nominate him for an Order of Australia medal or something, because his name has come up throughout this conference. He was one of the three people, including myself and my partner Paul, who pitched this idea to the government in the first place, and I don't think we would be here today without the input of Paul, so thank you very much. We've also got Penny Kidd, who runs Friends of Flagstone Creek Conservation Park, sitting humbly in the corner, and these people do all of this incredible work in their own time, with their own dedication and passion. So thank you for what you do, and yeah, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.